Welcome to MMA Mobsters, live from Moline, Illinois, in Joshua Chauvin's man cave at his home. This is a big week for everyone involved in MMA Mobsters. As most of you know, Pat Miletich, the UFC Hall of Famer, the inaugural UFC welterweight champion, has a fight coming up, has a big fight coming up, has a exciting fight coming up, has a fight coming up that is getting a lot of headlines and a lot of press, and they have a big press conference for it tomorrow. I'm filming this late Wednesday night. The press conference is Thursday. That'll be at the River Center at 5 o'clock on this Thursday. Mike Jackson will travel out. Pat Miletich will travel out. So Pat's on the road, and our producer is very involved with Caged Aggression, does a ton of stuff for them. So it's just me this week for what is an interesting card. They're calling this UFC Mexico, even though it's not in Mexico. It's UFC Mexico because I believe this Saturday is Mexican Independence Day or something along those lines. So they're calling it UFC Mexico. Would make a little more sense if it was in Mexico. The UFC has done several events in Mexico City. I believe last time they did a Mexico City event, a riot broke out after the Yair Rodriguez fight was called early due to an eye poke. They began rioting in the stands. They began throwing beer and glass bottles and shoes and whatever else at Michael Bisping and I believe Brendan Fitzgerald. And so I don't know if that's why the UFC hasn't gone back to Mexico City since. Obviously, all the COVID stuff happened. We're well past all that, but it's UFC Mexico. It's in Las Vegas. Pretty much every fight on this card, almost every fight on this card of the 11 fights, has at least one fighter who's either from Mexico or has Mexican Latino heritage, capped off by the main event, the rematch, Valentina Shevchenko and the new champion, Alexa Grasso. A very wild upset happened the last time they fought. Grasso dropped Valentina with a hard straight right, sat Valentina down, did not knock her out. Valentina hopped up. And then after that knockdown, looked like she was winning the fight, utilized mostly her wrestling, and was looking better as the fight was going on until in the fourth round, tried some spinning shit. And Miletich is never crazy about the spinning shit. He's told me multiple times, rather do something that's effective. He favors effectiveness over flashiness. Let's just put it that way. And I think he would be okay with that summarization. Try some spinning shit. The spinning shit does not work. In fact, it puts her in a position where Grasso jumps on her back after Valentina tries this spinning shit, sinks in a choke, and it's over. It's over. Alexa Grasso, not a woman who is known for her jiu-jitsu. She was a boxer, primarily a striker. But man, Valentina, usually fantastic, high IQ in the cage and out of the cage. She let that cage IQ slip for a second, and she paid by losing her belt. She had been the only 125-pound female champion in the UFC. They more or less created that division for her. She was a 135er, had lost a couple very close fights to Amanda Nunes, was more suited for 125. They gave her the division. She beat the brakes off of Priscilla Cachoeira. That's After that, we gave Priscilla the nickname Priscilla Catch a Beating, because Valentina beat her up so bad, and Mario Yamasaki let that fight go way too long. So I don't think we saw Mario Yamasaki ever ref a UFC fight, at least, after that. So they got to do the rematch, and let's get into this card. I believe we're going to throw some promos in here for the upcoming Pat Miletich Mike Jackson fight. They're all very excited about. So those will be in this video. For all I know, they already played. So I'm going to give the picks. That's what I'm here for. I certainly enjoy bantering with Pat. I know Pat, my brother Pat, enjoys giving me a hard time and busting my balls, but I'm primarily here to host and give my advice and my input as a guy who bets on sports full time, and specifically has had a lot of success betting MMA. Bet a lot of MMA, but a lot of football. We had week 1 of football just happened. That was wild. That was I don't usually wake up until 1 or 2 in the afternoon. I was up at 9. I bet the UFC Sydney fights until about 1 in the morning, and then probably about midnight, they ended. And then I was up and at 'em, 9 in the morning, crunching the numbers, looking at weather, looking at line movement, looking at injuries and stuff like that. Did my high stakes fantasy, did my betting. It was a long day, man, long day. We're talking with the night game, it was 9 in the morning to 10:30 at night, 11 o'clock at night. It's a long day. That's how NFL Sundays are for me. It was good. I bet a lot of unders. I believe as a whole in week 1, so we had 16 NFL games. I believe unders went 13-3. And that's good. I wouldn't necessarily chase that this week. I would look at the math, but that's fairly normal. I believe we saw that in not only week 1 last year, but the first few weeks. We saw unders hitting like crazy. A little pro tip for you for football and really any sport. The casual bettor loves to bet overs. You'll hear a lot of bravado, and frankly, I think it's pretty much bullshit. People saying, "Oh, betting and unders like wanting another man to sleep with your wife or something like that." Just stupid stuff. The casual bettor does not like betting unders. The casual bettor wants to see points and excitement. For that reason, sportsbooks will kind of make it more difficult for the over to hit. And that's why we see unders across really all sports hit more often than the overs do. I believe, look at the data from maybe the past 2 or 3 years. Unders hit close to 60% of the time, sometimes more often than that, depending on the sport or the time. But overall, unders hit way more than overs do. So I bet a lot of unders. I'll bet over some of the time, but I'm probably just over unders. I probably bet close to 90% unders, then taking that occasional over bet. Alrighty, let's get into some fights here. We have some big line movement on the first one. We have Josephine Knudsen is fighting Marnik Mann. We've seen Josephine move from minus 425 to minus 600. That's a huge line move. When you look at these two girls, we see 2 girls. This is going to be the first UFC fight for both. We see one is 6-0. Knudsen's 6-0. She's undefeated. Marnik Mann is 6-1. Her only loss was a brutal head kick that Bruno Brazil planted on her chin, and she landed that kick. It was a walk-off. Mann fell to the ground, unconscious, nasty knockout. That was Contender Series. Mann has, I believe, won her 1 fight since then. That was in some regional promotion, much like Caged Aggression. where Pat Miletich and Mike Jackson are fighting here on October 14th and doing the presser for tomorrow. She won her fight. Knutson fought in Contender Series just last month. Late August, she had a Contender Series fight. I had a bet on her in that fight. She looked great. Did not get the finish, but a pretty resounding ass whooping that she handed to her opponent. And it's just interesting. These records are not created the same. You would think that two girls in their first UFC fight, one is 6-0, one is 6-1. That's essentially identical records. You would think this would be more of a coin flip fight. Well, not all MMA resumes are the same. Not 18-2 for one MMA fighter is going to be drastically different than 18-2 for another MMA fighter. That's what my co-host Miletich talks about all the time. It's something that he's given me more of a newfound respect for. It was a big deal to me, but Miletich has really hammered that into my head, that strength of schedule thing. So you think you see that baked into the line movement a lot, but it's certainly important to look at. So for our girl, Josephine Knutson, we're looking at DraftKings. She's gone from minus 425 to minus 600. Caesars, she's gone from minus 450 to minus 600. Bet Rivers, easy Louise. She's gone from minus 435 to minus 770. It's important when you're looking at line movement to look at all the books. You may see a drastic line move on one sports book and then maybe an opposite line move on the other sports book. But when we see a situation like this, when every single sports book, she's moved over 100 points, and then Bet Rivers has moved 200, that's a 235 point move. That's a big deal. That sets off sirens for me. That sets off alarms for me. It's a big number, probably more of a parlay piece. I'll, probably have something of a straight bet. I don't mind in putting 1,000 to 2,000 on a minus 600 favorite if I think it's justified. If you follow me on Facebook and Instagram, you saw that I had 2,000 on a minus 700 female in Contender Series yesterday. That bet hit fairly easily. It's a lot of money to put down. I was essentially betting 2,000 to make 300, but I believed in it. I thought it was pretty much as close as you can get to free money, and I think we have that situation here. Josephine Knutson, you can lock her in. I love her as a parlay piece, and good way to start the card. If she's in most of your parlays, I'd be fine putting her in just about all of your parlays, and you will have a pretty good idea how your night's going. I expect her to smash. I think the line movement is justified. Like I said, not every 6-0, 6-1 record is the same. I believe that her 6-0 is much more impressive than the 6-1 record of Marnik Mann. And you just look at how they've done in their Contender Series fights, which is essentially a UFC fight. It's about the closest you can get to the UFC. It's essentially a tryout for the UFC. They have these Contender Series fights, and then the ones who look very good will be given a UFC contract. So, moving on here, and again, Josephine Knutson. That's our first MMA Mobsters lock of the day. I like her quite a bit. Big line movement, or decent line movement for this next guy here. Charlie Campbell. Charlie Campbell is out of the Sierra Longo Weidman training camp there in New Jersey. We've seen Campbell move Caesars 380 to minus 440. DraftKings 380 to minus 450. Charlie Campbell was on the bad end of one of the crazier Contender Series fights that I've ever seen. Lots of Contender Series alumni fighting on this card. We've seen a lot of Contender Series alumni in general in recent UFC fights. He fought Chris Duncan. Put it on Duncan. He was a decent favorite in that Duncan fight. He dropped Duncan. It looked like it was the beginning of the end. As Duncan is getting his face smashed in, throws somewhat of a Hail Mary punch, drops Campbell, finishes Campbell. Hell of a comeback. And Chris Duncan's a hell of a fighter. We saw him look extremely good in his UFC fight. Since then, he's had, I believe, one UFC fight Militech and I both liked him as a lock. This was the week that we had our buddy Randy Couture on the live show, and he was one of me and Militech's favorite bets. Duncan looked great. So I think that Duncan's really good, and there's no shame in Charlie Campbell losing to him. When I look at Alex Reyes, again, we have a 7-2 guy against a 13-3 guy, but the odds are drastically different. And I think that that's justified. I just like, when I watch tape, I just like everything I see from Charlie Campbell much more than I do with Reyes. And I think that while this isn't as drastic of a line move as we saw for our girl Josephine Knudsen, who was a lock it in, this is a decent line move. We're talking about 60 points move on Caesar, 60-point move on FanDuel, 55-point move on PointsBet. I like this bet a lot. I'm not going to lock it in, but I'm fine putting it in some of your parlays. I like this bet a lot. Next up, we have a female bout, Tracy Cortez. Tracy Cortez is an interesting case study. She is more famous for her looks and her social life than she is for her talent as a fighter. She's gorgeous. Anyone with one eye or two eyes can see that she's a very beautiful, athletic Latino woman. She dated Brian Ortega there for a while, had somewhat of a nasty breakup, traded some barbs on social media after they went from being one of the more high-profile MMA couples to being split up. Why am I talking about this? Who cares? Well, a lot of people care. And again, Tracy Cortez has gotten most of her fame by being gorgeous, dating Brian Ortega for, I think, over a year. They were together for a good amount of time and had a lot of fame through that, which is not so famous for is being a fighter. She is primarily a wrestler and is just really very average everywhere. She gets Jasmine Jasudavicius here. Jasudavicius has been up and down, both in the MMA, both with her MMA career and in the UFC. Let's look at her. I believe she had a very big win there in Canada a few months ago. She did beat the very talented Miranda Maverick. She fought on the undercard of the Irene Aldana, another Mexican, against Amanda Nunes. And Maverick's a massive favorite in that fight. Jasudavicius put it on her, man. Outstruck her and then out-wrestled her, which was wild. Looked very good against Maverick. There's been some stuff that has come out that maybe Maverick was hurt in that fight. She certainly did not look like the Miranda Maverick we all know and love and bet on, etc. I was able to not get killed on that bet. I did have a decent bet on Maverick, and after she just really looked awful and not like the Miranda Maverick that I've come to know and love, I hedged out of that bet. It was a good hedge out. Was able to get all my money back, and then I think even a little bit more. And Jasudavicius looked great. And then we saw Maverick go out, and speaking of Priscilla catch a beating, she put a whooping on Priscilla Cachoeira in her next fight. So I think that makes the Jasudavicius victory over Miranda Maverick certainly age well. Miranda Maverick's far from washed up. She looked great in her next fight against Priscilla Cachoeira. So I think Jasudavicius is legit. I think that Tracy Cortez is fine. We're looking at 10-1 versus 9-2, and this is lined as a coin flip, essentially. We're looking at 125. Tracy Cortez is the slightest of favorites. Jasudavicius plus 105. And I don't have a strong lean in this fight. Let's see what fight goes to decision is. I'm finding it difficult to find, and I don't want to have awkward silence on the show. This would be the time where I have Pat tell a story, or I get Militech worked up about something and have him go off on a story or something while I try to find the numbers here. Okay, I did find the numbers. We're looking at minus 350, fight goes to decision. Minus 333 on Betway. We're seeing a little bit of line movement. I like it, man. That would be my bet from this fight, and I actually like it quite a bit. I don't see either girl finishing each other here. Over 2.5. I like a little bit better odds for fight goes to decision. I like that bet a lot. I like that bet a lot. Speaking of that, if you are ever, or if you're ever wondering, Chauvin, should I take over 2.5 or just do fight goes to decision? Should I take under 2.5 or take fight doesn't go to decision? You're always gonna get a little better odds on, one way or the other. As far as would I take over 2.5 or fight goes to decision, especially with females, if there hasn't been a finish, and now we're in the last 2.5 minutes, there hasn't been a finish yet, there's not going to be a finish. In those last 2.5 minutes, we'll see a lot of laying on top of one another. We'll see trying to run the clock out. Not an insult, but we're more likely to see the male fighters really go for the kill there in the last 2.5 minutes. So for women's fights in particular, I almost always bet, if I think the fight goes deep, if I think there won't be a finish, I will almost always bet fight goes to decision, as opposed to betting over 2.5 rounds, just because you're going to get a little better odds that way and make a little more money. All right, we are 3 fights into an 11-fight card. Let's scroll down here. Here's a couple good Latino names. We had Edgar Chairez is fighting Daniel Da Silva Lacerda. I think the Da Silva part's new. I think he was just Daniel Lacerda there for a while, but he is now wanting to be called by his middle name. Chairez, minus 225 to minus 258. That's roughly a 35-point move. 225 to 250 on MGM, 225 to 250 on Caesars. Bigger move on Rivers. Bet Rivers minus 177 to minus 265. That's an 80-point move. When I look at these two fighters, I definitely am more aware of Chairez. Again, similar records. 10-5 for Chairez, 11-5 for Lacerda. I'm more familiar with the body of work for Chairez. He, in his first UFC fight, and this is something I've talked about with Militech, I'll often be more impressed with a fighter in a loss than I am with a fighter in a win. I'll often see more potential for a fighter in a loss than I will in a win. He fights a killer in Tatsuro Taira. That's the UFC 290 Volkanovski Rodriguez card. That's the one where we saw Duplessis knock out Robert Whittaker, and we saw Volkanovski. It's just all he does, man. All he does is win. We saw him look very dominant against the Mexican Yair Rodriguez, the very talented Mexican Yair Rodriguez. Volkanovski schooled him, just made him look like an amateur, but that's what Volkanovski does. So anyway, our boy Chairez is fighting Taira. Had a good fight. Looked like he had Taira in trouble standing, trouble on the ground. He certainly fought better than you think. That I believe he was roughly a plus 500 underdog. And Taira was about a minus 750 favorite. Certainly fought better than the line implied that he would. So I came out of that fight being like, hey, I'm going to think long and hard about betting Shirez in his next fight. And here's my chance. I like Shirez quite a bit. I like him to win this fight. And I will be betting on him. Roman Kopylov is fighting Josh Fremd. I think we're seeing two fighters going in different directions here. Talk about not being super impressed with a fighter, even in a win. Fremd fought Jamie Pickett. Jamie Pickett is one of the worst fighters in the UFC. I believe he was cut from the UFC after Fremd beat him. Fremd did not look dominant. I had a big bet on him that fight. He just kind of held Pickett against the cage, did get a couple takedowns, won a somewhat close, certainly not dominant snoozer of a decision. We saw Fremd lose badly to Tresean Gore. Tresean Gore is not a guy that I'm impressed with. And now we see Kopylov had some issues with takedown defense. Seems to have worked that. Seems to have at least gotten the takedown defense adequate. And man, when he's able to stay standing, he's an all-world striker. He's one of the best strikers in that UFC division. I don't know that he'll ever necessarily be a champion someday. I don't know that he'll even be a top 10 guy. He certainly could. Dangerous striking. Thunder in both his fists, thunder in both his feet. And Fremd he's just so blah. It's just so blah. I think we see Fremd attempt a couple lazy takedowns. I think we see Kopylov shove him off. And I think we see Kopylov put it on him. Minus 240 to minus 370 over there on Caesars. That's setting off a few alarms for me. I think we see him beat him, man. I don't hate betting him to win by finish. That'll shrink the odds quite a bit. But as it is, Roman Kopylov, you can lock that in. I will be betting it heavily. I like Roman Kopylov to get the win quite a bit here. Moving on, we have the Mexican fighter Lupita, or Lupi, as her nickname is. Lupi Godinez is minus 440. She opened at minus 440. She's still minus 440. Yeah, pretty stale line movement here. Yeah, that's weird. So DraftKings, FanDuel, MGM, and Caesars, she's the same odds that she opened up at. It's bounced around a little bit, but she's right back to where she started on all three books. That's very interesting to me. A little bit of a move on Rivers. Over on Bet Rivers, she's minus 435 to minus 480. That's a 45-point line move. The issue with Lupi Godinez is she's a fun fighter. She's an active fighter, has a bit of a gas tank issue, tends to kind of bully her opponents, overpower her opponents, comes out in the first round blazing, and tends to get a little bit tired. We saw Angela Hill beat her when Lupi gassed herself out. Lupi was also, I believe, was she fighting up a division? I'd have to fact check that. But Lupi's fun, and I think that 450, 440 is about the right line for her. And Elise Reed is just very underwhelming. Doesn't really do anything good. At least Lupi, even though she has a ton of holes in her game, not the best striker. She wants to get you against the cage, find that double leg, and not a boring wrestler by any means. She is a action-packed, get it on the ground. She comes out like a house on fire. She wants to get you on the ground, and then very violent, nasty ground and pound. Pretty good submission game when she gets it down there, but if she doesn't get that finish in the first round or the second round, you're going to be a little bit nervous because she does have those gas tank issues. Looked fine in her last fight. You can put her in some parlays. That's fine. She's not a lock it in for me, but I like her to win this fight. Another man with Mexican heritage, Fernando Padilla, is fighting Kyle Nelson. We had Kyle Nelson, I believe, it's interesting to me, the crossover between people. Yeah, so we have, this is our second or third fighter who just fought on the UFC Canada card, and now they're on the UFC Mexico card, all fighting Mexicans. So that's interesting. A bit of a Mexico versus Canada theme going on here. Beats Blake Bilder. Militech and I will occasionally get some Ron. We liked Blake Bilder a lot in that fight. That was another fight where I did not like what I was seeing early. And you have to be careful hedging, man. Hedging can, oh man, you can kind of live or die by the hedge. There's nothing worse than when you hedge out of a bet, whether it's a fight or a football game or a baseball game. You hedge out because you don't like what you're seeing, and then the hedge loses and your original bet wins. You've just kind of thrown away all of your profit. So you have to be careful with hedging. It's a lot of trial and error. It really is kind of a fine science, and it's something that you have to do on the fly. But if you've done your work and you've done your research and you've informed yourself, then it isn't so much just kind of a coin flip on the fly. You're doing a million calculations, simulations in your head with the knowledge that you have, using the math, using tape study, using knowledge, using prior experience, stuff like that. And yeah, we're getting into, I think, halfway through the second round, and I was like, Bilder just is not there, and Nelson is putting it on him. And we had also seen on that UFC Canada card, we had seen the judges be incredibly biased towards the Canadians. So I also knew if this fight goes to decision, it's gonna go to Nelson, because the judges have been pretty shamelessly biased towards the local Canadian fighters here. So did a hedge. That hedge worked. It was a hedge. It was kind of a plus hedge. It was a hedge to get my Bilder money back and also make a little more on Nelson. So that worked out. But man, I think that was more of a case of Bilder looking bad than it was Nelson looking great. Nelson didn't do anything amazing. Bilder just kind of fought like a goofball and just really didn't show up. And then Nelson fed off the crowd a bit and won a relatively close fight. I wouldn't call it a robbery, but relatively close fight that he won unanimously by decision. Again, I didn't come out of that fight being super impressed with Kyle Nelson. I came out of that fight being kind of disgusted with Blake Bilder's performance in there. So with Padilla, minus 250 to minus 265. That's not setting off any alarms for me. Padilla would be my pick. When I look at Padilla, I see good fundamentals, I see good technique, and I just think he has a higher ceiling than Kyle Nelson. And I think this may be a bit of a sell high spot on Kyle Nelson, who is just, no offense to the man, is just really not that good of a fighter. And his win against Blake Bilder was far more Bilder looking bad than it was Nelson all of a sudden looking like a world beater. Amazing fighter. We are moving right along through these fights here. We have Christian Giagos is fighting Daniel Zellhuber. Zellhuber is from Mexico. Don't be fooled by the very German-sounding last name. Zellhuber is one of many Mexicans fighting on this UFC Mexico card. I believe they're calling it UFC Noche or something like that. Anyway, nice little line movement for Zellhuber here. We're talking about minus 265 to minus 295 on FanDuel, minus 225 to minus 250 on MGM. Not much move on DraftKings or MGM. So Giagos is a pretty well-rounded guy, not really great at anything, but well-rounded. Zellhuber, also a pretty well-rounded guy, and Zellhuber has a lot of power. The power edge would certainly go to Zellhuber here. Two very different records, 20-10 for Giagos, 13-1 for Zellhuber. Like I said, you can't just look at those records and think, this is the fighter they are. You got to dig in, like Militech talks about. Look at the strength of schedule, see who they have fought. We're looking at Zellhuber beat a very talented guy in Lando Groovy, Venata in their fight. And so he is 1-1 here in the UFC, 2-1 if you include his Contender Series which I usually will. I got to give the lean to Zell Huber here. I think he's the more polished guy. I know he's the more powerful guy. I think especially in those striking exchanges, he will look good. Is Giagos able to get it to the ground? From what I've seen from Zell Huber's defensive wrestling, I'm not super concerned about that. It's certainly not my most confident bet on the card, but I can say that I will have at least something of a bet on Zell Huber here. If you're going to bet him, I would look at Caesars or Betway. Those are the best odds. You should always be shopping for the best odds. If you like a guy to win, don't just bet the first line that you see or your favorite sports book, and you can use these tools. Most of them are free online to compare sports books. If you're going to bet 200 on Zell Huber or 200 on a Zell Huber parlay with one of these other fighters that we like a lot, like for instance Knudsen. If you were going to do $100 on a Knudsen Zell Huber parlay, or $200 on a Knudsen Zell Huber parlay, that's what you want to bet. Would you rather turn that 200 into 380, or would you rather turn that 200 into 405? A lot of people will not line shop. They will not find the best odds. Not every sportsbook has the same odds. Sportsbooks will have drastically different odds. You'll see a fighter be minus 300 on one sportsbook and minus 260 on another sportsbook, or maybe even lower, or minus 340 on another sportsbook. These odds are drastically different, and if it's just basic math, it's just responsible, smart betting. Why wouldn't you want to find the best line? So I would highly recommend that everyone watching this, everyone who bets, I don't care if you're doing $1 bets or $1,000 bets, you should have an account on every legal sports book. And when you want to make a bet, find the best line. You'd be shocked, or maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you're one of those people who's saying, "Oh, I need to do that," and there's no shame there. But yeah, you need to do that. It's shocking to me how many people don't look for the best line. I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that, because that is the smart thing to do. That's the mathematical thing to do. Speaking of math, Raul Rosas Jr., the 18-year-old, the youngest fighter in the UFC, looked dominant in his first UFC fight, got a quick win, got exposed a little bit in his second UFC fight. He fought a veteran, gassed himself out, and looked like an 18-year-old kid there in the second and third round. He was tired. He was almost a little bit sad. I wasn't too sad because I had hammered his opponent there after the first round, but it was kind of sad. He had his first taste of defeat. That's good. He's an 18-year-old kid. There's still a lot of growing to do physically, emotionally, mentally. The sharp bettors believe that he will come back better than ever. Folks, we've seen Raul Rosas Jr. go from minus 550 to minus 750 over on BetMGM. We've seen him go from, what's DraftKings doing? Oh, goodness gracious. Minus 200 to minus 750 on DraftKings. That is wild. Wild line movement. Minus 560 to minus 715 on BetRivers. Terrence Mitchell is not that good, and I think no disrespect to the man, it's pretty obvious what Dana White and company are doing here. They want to continue to build the prospect Raul Rosas Jr. He's only 18. He's only 18. He's only 18. That's what you keep on hearing. They see him as somewhat of maybe a John Jones, who came into the UFC extremely young and became one of the greatest UFC fighters ever. That's what they want to do with Raul Rosas Jr. here. That's what they've tried to do with varying degrees of success. With Macy Barber, came into the UFC very young, had a few hiccups. We saw Macy look incredible in her last fight, so that is paying off a bit. What the UFC is invested in her. The UFC is setting up this fight for Rosas Jr. to roll. Sharp bettors have figured that out very quickly. That's why we're seeing money pouring in on Rosas Jr. It's a big number, minus 700. Maybe that's something where you get three big favorites and put them together, but that is also going to be a lock it in for me. I will be betting that heavily. I will have that in probably all of my parlays, and I do not mind. In fact, I would recommend put Rosas Jr. in some of those parlays, but then you can also bet Rosas Jr. to win by finish. I don't see him winning a decision here. I see him looking dominant and finding that finish. So, co-main event time, and then it's main event time, and then we'll sign off on under 50 minutes, and we wish Miletich and his opponent Mike Jackson, but mostly our boy, my co-host Miletich, we wish him well in his press conference tomorrow. We wish him well as he drives. He's probably, I would imagine, probably already gotten into the Quad Cities safely. I haven't talked to him since, I believe, yesterday we talked, but I knew he was going to be driving today. Like I said, I'm doing this late on a Wednesday night, so he's probably in safe, tucked into his bed somewhere, and he's going to have that press conference with Mike Jackson, and knowing the wily, entertaining Pat Miletich, he'll drop a few sound bites, a few funny things as he does some trash talk with Mike Jackson to promote this fight, and that should be fun. So good luck to you tomorrow, Pat, and I will see you next week for our Mma Mobsters show. Co-main event time. Guy I'm a big fan of, Jack Della Maddalena. Minus 105 to minus 155 on Caesars. Plus 136 to minus 148 on DraftKings. That is a pow underdog to favorite. You guys know I love my underdogs to favorites. Fighting Kevin Holland. This is interesting. Kevin Holland will probably not pose much of a wrestling threat. And we've seen Jack Della look good. There was some question. He has all-world striking. Can he defend takedowns? We saw him get in a little bit of trouble with that Russian he fought last summer, so a little over a year ago. Looked like he was going to get submitted there in the first round. He got out of it. I think was even able to reverse the position and find a finish himself. So I think that the Jack Della can't stop takedowns, Jack Della is a liability on the ground, I think that was a bit overblown. I think we've seen Jack Della look quite good with his defensive wrestling, look quite good with his defensive jiu-jitsu. He will always, look to win a fight with his all-world striking, his hands, his fists, his knees, his elbows. They're good, man. He's quick, and he's powerful, and he's violent, and his technique is really good. When you watch his footwork, in and out of range, everything's textbook, everything's good. A lot of similarity between him and the prospect Ian Gary. We will not see these two fight each other anytime soon. The UFC wants to keep building these two prospects who are very similar but very different. Both are in the same weight class there. One is Australian, one is Irish. These two guys won't fight each other anytime soon. The UFC wants to keep building these hype trains up, and I think the hype train of both is justified. I think we're looking at Ian Gary and Jack Della Maddalena. One or both could very well be a champion in this division. They're both good, man. But this is not Ian Gary week. This is Jack Della week. I think Jack Della rolls here. I think that it's essentially going to be a kickboxing match with Kevin Holland. And Kevin Holland is fun. Kevin Holland is very talented in his own right. But there's levels to this freaking game. And Jack Della, he's just a level or two or three above Kevin Holland. I love Jack Della here. You're getting a really nice line on him, minus 148. That's close to double your money. You would turn $100 into roughly 170, something like that. I love Jack Della here. I will be betting him heavily. Underdog, flip to favorite. And also just when you look at the tape, Kevin Holland's fast. Jack Della's faster. Kevin Holland has power. Jack Della has more power. Kevin Holland can be a bit foolish in there sometimes, but does have good footwork and technique. Not the best cage IQ some of the time, but certainly has fundamentals. Jack Della has better fundamentals. Jack Della is just better everywhere here. The only part of the fight where Holland would be better, or may be better, is maybe a slight wrestling edge, maybe a slight jiu-jitsu edge, but I don't think he'll wrestle that much. And even if he does, we've seen Jack Della be quite good at stopping these takedowns, keeping the fight a kickboxing match, which is what he wants. I think Jack Della rolls here, man, and I think that the Jack Della legend, hype train, continues to grow. And I think in this case, I think that the hype train is justified. Main event time, folks. I touched on this at the beginning of the show. Valentina Shevchenko, considered by many, especially after Amanda Nunes had her kind of embarrassing loss to Juliana Pena, considered by many to be the female GOAT, the best female fighter out there. Valentina Shevchenko was shocked by Alexa Grasso in their fight last year. Massive upset. One of the bigger upsets of the past several years. Obviously, Sean Strickland beating Israel Adesanya last week is up there with one of the biggest upsets in modern UFC history, especially the past several years. This is up there too. So you've seen Shevchenko open at minus 265, even though she lost the first fight and was something of like a minus 600, minus 700, minus 800 favorite. They make her the favorite again, minus 265. The sharp bettors say not so quick, and they bet that line down to minus 180. So this tells me people who make a living at this, whale bettors, people who bet a lot, are coming in on the Grasso side. And I can't blame them. It was not a complete fluke that Grasso beat Shevchenko. Yes, it was somewhat of a crazy, weird end of the fourth round. Shevchenko tries some spinning shit, leaves her, completely whiffs on the spinning shit, is somewhat out of it for a second. Grasso seizes on it, hops on the back, because Valentina, when she tried the spinning stuff, presented her back. Again, super high Q, Valentina Shevchenko. Not quite sure what happened there, but it happened. She presented her back right there. Grasso hops on, boom, choke. Got the back, got the arm under the chin, in the neck. Shevchenko, one of the greatest female fighters ever, is tapping, loses her title. For the first time ever, we have a 125 female champion not named Valentina Shevchenko. What happens here? If you gave me $100 and said you had to bet on this fight, I would bet on the underdog. We saw Alexa Grasso drop her in the first. We saw Grasso really, the whole fight, look like the better striker. Shevchenko found her success on the ground until, somewhat ironically, Grasso finished her on the ground. Grasso finished her not with a punch, not with a kick, but with a choke, a submission. Shevchenko is getting up there in age. How old are you these days, Valentina's 35. Same age as me. And I can tell you that as I have gotten myself back in shape, it's I don't know, there's parts of your body that work better than ever. There's parts that hurt, man. There's parts that don't work. There's stuff that, you hear that? My arm popping. There's stuff that clicks. There's stuff that hurts. And Valentina is an all-world athlete, but 35 is no joke. I feel almost silly, and I'm sure Militech would give me a hard time if he was on the other end of this show, as he always is, because that crazy mother effer Militech is fighting at 57, so 35 is nothing. But it does matter. And as Valentina gets up there in age, she's not getting any younger, and her opponent is, I know Grasso is younger. How much younger is she? 30. So 30 is kind of a sweet spot for fighters. A lot of them will say that is almost somewhat of your prime, is late 20s, early 30s. But 35, you certainly fight very, very well at 35, male or female. But you're not in your prime anymore. I think that's safe to say, and maybe that's what we saw out of Valentina in her last fight. Because again, it wasn't just that kind of crazy rear naked choke that she succumbed to in the 4th round. Grasso had plenty of moments. One of the best was dropping Valentina cold. Dropped her cold. Straight right. Valentina's down. Recovered. Survived. But she put her on notice very early in that fight. Her striking was quicker. It was crisper. And this fight will be interesting. Grasso is going to be my lean there. Maybe it's something you look to bet live. But it'll be an interesting fight. It'll be an interesting fight. UFC Mexico. This is going to be a fun card. Bet it. Enjoy it. Again, good luck to my co-hosts, my friend, my brother, my buddy, Pat Militech, as he does his press conference. I believe you can watch on the Caged Aggression website. And if I know my buddy Militech at all, I'm sure he has some one-liners already drawn up that he's going to roast Mike Jackson with. And Mike Jackson can talk some crap too, and so they will be going back and forth. There will be one-liners, I'm sure, on both sides. There will be viral moments on both sides. There will be sound bites on both sides, and they will face off. And for the first time, that'll be a photo opportunity. We're excited. I look forward to talking about it with Pat next week. UFC Mexico, which is in Las Vegas, headlined Alexa Grasso, Valentina Shevchenko, co-headlined by my guy, Jack Della Maddalena, and the always entertaining Kevin Holland. This is a fun card. It's a violent card. It's a fun card from a fan perspective, and I think it's a fun card from a money-making perspective. So make some bets, make some money. Mma Mobsters to the moon. Please like this video on YouTube. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share with your friends. It's exciting that we're growing this thing. I miss you, Pat. I miss you, Justin. We'll see you next week. Mma Mobsters to the moon. We love you guys. Have fun betting the fights on Saturday. Bye-bye.